Not just on the battleground, even at the United Nations, Russia and Ukraine have been at loggerheads. On Friday, even before the UN Security Council could start its proceedings to discuss peace and security in Ukraine, a dramatic showdown happened. When Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba called for a moment of silence to honor the victims of the aggression, and the members arose from their seats, Russian Ambassador Vasily Nebenzia interjected. Take a look at how it all played out.
On this tragic day, when we mourn lives and destinies broken by Russia, I kindly ask everyone to observe a minute of silence in memory of the victims of the aggression. I thank you, Mr. President.
The representative of the Russian Federation has asked for the floor to make a statement.
Mr. President, we are getting up on our feet to honor the memory of all victims of what has happened in Ukraine starting in 2014. All of those who perished, all lives are priceless, and that is why we are rising to honor the memory of them all.
I thank the representative for their statement.
Russian ambassador to the United Nations also objected to Ukraine's foreign minister being permitted to address the meeting ahead of council members on the speakers list. The objection was made to Malta's foreign minister, as Malta currently holds the presidency of the council.
Once again, I take note of the...
Mr. President, I would like to just say a few words regarding a point of order. We would like to ask you to please clarify what is the basis you are proposing to give the floor to the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, and to give them the floor before the members of the Council speak. We have nothing against his statement, but the Council has its rules, which were established long before Malta became President of the UN Security Council.
At the Council meeting, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres said that despite the Security Council holding more than 40 debates on the conflict, the guns are talking now.
Life is a living hell for the people of Ukraine. An estimated 17.6 million people, nearly 40% of the population of Ukraine, require humanitarian assistance and protection. The crisis has erased 30% of pre-war jobs. The World Food Programme estimates that nearly 40% of Ukrainians are unable to afford or access enough food. And the war has sparked a displacement crisis not seen in Europe in decades. More than 8 million Ukrainian refugees have been recorded across Europe, in addition to an estimated 5.4 million who have been internally displaced.
Meanwhile, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has warned the UN Security Council that it should not be fooled by calls for a temporary or unconditional ceasefire in Ukraine. Blinken's warning came just hours after China called for a comprehensive ceasefire as part of a 12-point plan on the war to bring peace.
Council members should not be fooled by calls for a temporary or unconditional ceasefire. Russia will use any pause in fighting to consolidate control over the territory it's illegally seized and replenish its forces for further attacks. That's what happened when Russia's first assault on Ukraine froze in 2015. Look at what followed. And members of this council should not fall into the false equivalency of calling on both sides to stop fighting or calling on other nations to stop supporting Ukraine in the name of peace.
Earlier on Thursday, the United Nations General Assembly passed a non-binding resolution condemning the Russian invasion. 141 countries voiced support for the resolution, while 7 opposed it and 32 abstained. For more on this, our correspondent Susan Tehrani has sent us this report from New York. Listen in.
1 year into Russia's full-scale incursion into Ukraine, the war continues to have devastating consequences for civilians and far-reaching implications for the global economy. Ukraine and its allies have called for peace under the UN Charter and call on Russia to pull all of its troops out of Ukraine. However, other UN member states are calling for the immediate cessation of hostilities without any preconditions, which could freeze the front lines of the conflict and see Russia seize a significant amount of Ukrainian territory. During Friday's UN Security Council meeting, Secretary of State Antony Blinken told council members that they should not be fooled by calls for a temporary or unconditional ceasefire in Ukraine and should not fall into, quote unquote, the false equivalency on calling on both sides to stop the fighting. Secretary Blinken made these comments shortly after China called for a halt in violence and a ceasefire as part of its so-called peace plan. Ultimately, perhaps how unified the West can remain and how many more countries it's able to bring on its side may determine the outcome of this war moving forward. Susan Tehrani reporting from New York for WION World is One.